It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
This is the fourth thing that wealthy people do not invest in because they understand it. Use assets.
Yeah, this one I think is such a common misconception and so arbitrarily thrown around incorrectly, right? So I'll have a friend and they're thinking about buying their first home and they're like, giving me all these reasons why they can go do 100% financing. And even though they're not following my 25% rule, and even though they're not following the rules of thumbs, it's okay for them to stretch a little bit farther because they say to me, it's an investment. Mom, I'm going to buy this. It's an investment. There's not any more land. Real estate only goes up. It's an investment.
I'm also amazed at how people now. Look, we're going to talk about cars because I think that's the one. It's not the latte effect; it's the car effect that really is blowing up people's retirements. But I will pick on primary residence and the fact that I'm a little sad from some of you who watch and then post comments on YouTube. As you say, because when we do incremental analysis, meaning that you have the same dollars, but you're doing one thing with this dollar versus this with this $1, and what the long-term ramifications of that one incremental decision, the difference between those two. And you guys always in the comments go, nobody saves money. You might as well put it in the house because otherwise they're going to go blow it on something else. That's a horrible way to think about your fellow people because I'm thinking through the Money Guy Show, we're changing people.
That's
so
right.
You understand the difference between use assets with the power of your army of dollar bills, the opportunity cost of actually using this money working for you. That's what we're here for. So the first thing, though, because this is one that I feel like there's a few traps that catch young people. And I can tell you because I had friends, you graduate college, you're all proud of yourself because you have accomplished, you've made it through the gauntlet. It's time to reward yourself. And, it's not like 22-year-olds go out and buy houses typically unless they're Bo Hansen. but most 22-year-olds go reward themselves with like a vehicle.
Yeah, I've earned it.
This is how we do it. Here's the problem with vehicles, though. Man, you look cool. That new car smell, it's awesome. But these things, they depreciate. They cost money to maintain them. You have to pay money to fuel them. And then there's lots of other ancillary costs like insurance. And then it's a matter of time before a grocery store buggy zones in on the side of it anyway and makes you feel like, oh, goodness.
Man, that special peach that I had is now damaged.
So, and we have proof of this. I mean, if you think about the typical vehicle, and it is napalm to your personal finances, they depreciate like a rock.
That's right. We even had Daniel put together, this is data from Edmunds. This is sort of the typical depreciation of a new car. So on the lot, it's worth 100% of what you're going to pay for it. As soon as you drive it off the lot, like the day after, it is no longer worth 100%. And on average, a one-year-old car is worth about 81% of what you paid. Two-year car, 69%. 58, 49, 40, 33, 27, 21, 15. And by year 10, you have about 10% residual value of what you paid for the automobile.
So we like if you're going to buy a used car that works for your family, try to get it between that year 3 to 6. I mean, that is the key part. Let somebody else pay that big part of the depreciation, but just respect the car thing. There's a reason when we talk 23.8. Somebody asked me recently on YouTube on the comments section, they said, where do you guys come up with that? Here's the whole purpose of 23.8 is that we're trying to keep your eyeballs from getting bigger than your wallet. That we try to give you the flexibility. I think that's one of the things that makes the Money Guy Show different than a lot of other commentators is that they give you absolutes. And a lot of times we know life is not as black and white as people will present. So we try to give you the flexibility, but we are counting on you to be responsible. So that's why we do require 20% down. Don't finance longer than 3 years. That's to protect you from the depreciation. And then we don't want it to be greater than 8% of your income. So that way you're leaving a lot of life there with the other 92%. And we want to make sure the investments are bigger. Your monthly investments have to be greater than your car payment. And remember, the biggest one of them all, don't go buy a luxury car unless you can pay it the same as cash.
Now, one thing, if you're out there listening on iTunes or iHeartRadio or Stitcher, you're not in the live stream. We do this show as a live stream, right, on Tuesdays. And there's actually a chat that's happening right in front of me. And I think it's wonderful. And one of our folks, Vinyl, he made this comment. He said, Look, if a car can blow up your retirement, you probably don't have enough money. And I want to make it clear, we're not talking about the purchase of a car blowing up your retirement. It's a behavior. It's a behavior that we're trying to get you to understand that when you buy use assets, whether that use asset is a car or a home, or we'll talk about a few others, fill in the blank, it's not about that one singular purchase that you're making. It's about a lifetime of making those decisions that are not ultimately moving you closer to your financial goals. They're pulling you away from that. And the sooner you recognize that, the sooner you realize it, the more quickly you're going to be able to actually work towards that place where a car decision won't affect your long-term finances.
That's exactly right. Especially, I'm looking at my 25, my 30-year-olds, my 35-year-olds. Guys, every dollar has so much opportunity. There's a reason I have this koozie. It says, this $1 beer cost me $88 is recognized. Now realize this is a person retiring when they're 66 years of age, not 65, because we respect everything. But it is one of those things where I want you to understand that every dollar has so much potential, and I don't want you to have regrets later. Now, what you mentioned earlier, Bo, housing, because this is one, look, up until 2008, I think a lot of people thought that adage that, well, they ain't creating any more land.
Ain't making no more land.
So it was like you couldn't lose money with real estate investing before we hit 2008, and then we realized, we can run this thing up enough to where you can lose money on it. But I want people to also understand this is one of those things you can turn a positive into a negative, where your primary residence, a lot of people think that they'll keep stretching, going bigger, bigger, and the problem is, you can actually price yourself outside of happiness.
That's right.
If you think about every time you upgrade your house, or if you're stretching yourself, the bigger square footage is going to cost more to heat and cool.
Yep.
It's going to have more insurance costs.
Yep.
And it's going to be more rooms you have to put furniture and stuff in.
That one is the truest. That's one, can I be honest, when I went from my first house to my second house, I didn't think about that one. I was like, man, I got these bedrooms. I don't have people in these bedrooms, but I can't just have them sitting there empty. And the further you move along in life, the less able you are to let rooms sit empty in your house. A lot of folks only think about that purchase price, that thing on, when I go to Zillow or MLS, that's the cost of the house. That's only part of it.
Yeah.
And if you don't recognize that, again, you're not setting yourself up to be able to move towards your long-term financial goals.
And then I have another risk that I think Financial Mutants specifically, you run the risk of. We all think that we are contrarians. I mean, Financial Mutants, you guys, you're watching the Money Guy show, you're a contrarian. And a lot of you guys, you're thinking, you know what? It's best, if I am going to stretch, it's best to be the cheapest house on my street. Because, and a lot of you, if you were stretching to be the cheapest house on a very nice street, you might also be the poorest person on your very nice street. And that sounds good because the thought is that when you go sell the house 10 years in the future, if it's the cheapest house on a very nice street, you're probably going to have an easier time to sell. Plus, you're going to have more opportunity for appreciation. This is going to be a great return. The problem is you might not be taking into account that if you are the poorest person on your street, it might also create a lot of unhappiness.
That's right.
Because we all know the people we hang out with influence where our happiness is, what our spending patterns are. And so I know that's contrarian to think that, because it sounds like a great value to get the cheapest house on the street, but I'm telling you, you might be setting yourself up for a lot of other things. Don't let use assets be what you consider an investment, because you're actually living in this house.
And I think you have to understand what it is that makes you happy and what it is that you value. We live here just south of Nashville, and it's a really hot real estate market. And I have some friends who they bought a house a couple of years ago, and it's gone up in value, right? I mean, it just has blown up in terms of the equity that they've built. And they keep saying to me, man, I'm going to sell it. I'm going to cash out. I'm like, why? You realize that when you sell this house, that 20, 30, 40, 50% you've made on your house, when you buy the next house, unless you're moving somewhere else, you just have to buy a bigger house. It's not going to, so don't always try to swim upstream just because you can. Just because you can't move into the bigger house, into the nicer neighborhood, have the nicer thing. If that's not part of your plan, don't do it just because you can, because it's just like you said, Brian, you will price yourself out of happiness.
I always love giving a few stats to kind of close out a segment, put an exclamation point on something. In the next Millionaire Next Door, the follow-up that Sarah did to her father's The Millionaire Next Door, it was actually published what the median home value for millionaires was, and it was $850,000. 3.4 times their current income on average, or median, I should say. And then the median purchase price was 465. So a lot of these people had appreciation.
Yeah, they've been in. That's what I'm saying is they stayed in the house for a
Yeah.
while. I didn't say most millionaires went out and bought an $850,000 house. It says they bought a $465,000 house and they lived in it. They used it and it grew. It turned into into a nice price appreciated home.
Yeah, I mean, and it ties into why they're the millionaire next door. I thought this last thing, because talk about secondary residence, because this is another use asset. People think you have this mental checklist of what success looks like. A lot of people think, well, I'll go buy a second home. That's when I get the vacation property to reward the family for all that I've done. 64% of millionaires have never owned a second home or vacation house.
Yep. Because again, if we talk about the use asset that you have that has the insurance and the furnishings and the utilities, it's an asset that you're using every day. Imagine if that use asset is one you only get to use a few times a year. Those costs are still there. That draw on your Armory Valor bills is still there. So before you make that decision, make sure that you know your why around why you're making that decision.
No doubt.